This is the Marketing Podcast Network.
Stories influence, teach, and inspire us. But what about the storytellers who create them? Uncorking a Story profiles storytellers to uncover how their background and life experiences influence the stories they create. We learn what motivates them, their path to success, and what fuels them to keep creating. It all starts by asking one simple question: where does your story begin? Welcome to Uncorking a Story. Now here's your host, Mike Carlin.
Well, hello and welcome to Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carlin. Today, I'm happy to introduce you to Mark Schiff. Mark is a stand-up comedian who has headlined at comedy clubs nationwide, including all the major casinos in Las Vegas and Atlantic City. He's toured worldwide with Jerry Seinfeld for 15 years. Mark has specials on HBO and Showtime, has appeared on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, and Late Night with David Letterman. He's featured in Seinfeld's Netflix special, Jerry Before Seinfeld, and Live from the Laugh Factory with Dom Irrera. He joins me tonight on Uncorking a Story to chat about his career and book, Why Not? Lessons on Comedy, Courage, and Chutzpah. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Mark.
Thank you, Michael. Good to be here. Let me start by saying how we met. You thought that I had cancer. Is that right?
That is a true story. I thought this is a case of mistaken identity.
Yeah, well, I don't, and I'm here. So, no, it's kind of a bittersweet story. I know.
If there's one lesson I've learned from this, it's I should accuse other people of having been in that hospital room because I got an immediate response from you when I sent you that email. So
Maybe you saw X-rays of me that I didn't know about. So, yeah. So anyway, as soon as I got an email from you saying, "Are you the Mark or comedian?" You said comedian.
Yep.
Was in the Sloan Kettering Cancer Hospital. I immediately had to get back to you to let you know I'm alive and well, and then here we go. So
here we are. Well, Mark, I need to know, because I ask everybody the same question to begin. Where does your story as an author begin?
Yeah, I know you do ask those questions, and I'm ready for it. So, I got to say 12 years old, and it's funny how I've heard many writers say this, one night, I was about 12, living with my parents in Forest Hills, a one-bedroom apartment, and I got up and I started writing a play. And I don't remember ever seeing a play or going to a play. I weren't in plays in school. But I got up and I started writing a play. And it was, I don't have a copy of it, but I remember it was about a pregnant woman that fell down a flight of stairs. Very upbeat play. So that's what I did. And then I loved writing. I started writing poetry. I moved into Greenwich Village, grew a beard, and became a poet. People say, "How'd you pay your rent?" I got a 3-bedroom apartment with another friend of mine. It was $350 a month. And we got a third roommate and charged him $300. So my rent in Greenwich Village for 5 years was $25 a month, and it came with electricity. So all I needed was about $75 a month to live in Manhattan. And I became a comedian. I wanted to also at 12 years old. 12 was a very big age for me. At 12, my parents took me to the Boulevard nightclub in Rego Park, Queens, to see a nightclub, a show. And the opening act was a guy named Rodney Dangerfield. Never seen a comedian live. This guy busted through the curtains and he was sweating and telling jokes. And I never saw my parents or anybody laugh that hard in my life. And I immediately had an aha moment. I said, "That's it. I know what I want to do. I want to be a comedian." I never looked back.
So how did you turn that dream into a reality? Was it, a matter of living in Greenwich Village and hitting every spot you could hit to work your material?
Well, good question. At first I went to comedy clubs, the improvisation, mostly from the ages of like 16. I had phony ID, 16, 17, 18. And I watched comedians, Freddie Prinze, Jimmy Walker, a lot of guys there. Jay Leno was there, Elaine Boozler.
Mid to late 70s?
Yeah, 75. So. And I went over to this comedian, Ed Bluestone. And I said, how do you become a comedian? He said, this is what you do. You write original material, memorize it, and go in front of people you don't know and tell and say it. And that's all you got to do. And that's as true today as it was 50 years ago. You write stuff, you memorize it, and you don't tell it to your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, your aunt and uncles, your friends, because they will lie to you. And they don't know. You got to go in front of strangers. And here's the trick. We used to have little tape recorders. Now you have the iPhone or whatever you use. Tape everything you say in front of these people, and the tape recorder will never lie to you. It will tell you exactly how well you're doing or not doing, and that's the deal. And I started with Jerry Seinfeld, Paul Reiser, Larry Miller, Gilbert Gottfried, Joe Piscola, Richard Belzer. And every night for the first 5 years, I did like 4, 5, 6 shows a night for free. I earned my first $20 around my 4th year into comedy. And I bombed every night.
But bombing's important, isn't it?
Well, yes, it is. If you have, bombing separates the men from the boys. That's it. If you can stand it, if you can stomach it and get by, because audiences tell you if you're funny or not, or what your material is. They will tell you. And if you can stand that until you come up with something, you might have a shot.
Yeah, because audiences don't lie either. It's the one thing. A joke either works or it doesn't work at any given time. For any given audience. I understand it's different certain nights depending on who's in the room and what the vibe is and the energy. But it's an objective thing. It works or it doesn't, and I think you can learn from it. But really find you could also use it as a way of almost focus grouping stuff and fine tuning it, right?
That's exactly what it is. It's the ultimate focus group. 200 people staring at you, and you, like Seinfeld said, you better feel like you have something more important to say than they have. Because if not, they're going to get you. And it is the ultimate focus group. And we were just talking about it the other day. It's still to this day, it's the only way to do it. Strangers, spit it out, and they decide. And it's tough, but it can be done.
And this is going to sound like a funny analogy, but I almost liken it to playing golf. So I write a lot. I write a lot of jokes. I write a lot of material, but that's akin to going to the driving range, right? You're hitting it. It means nothing. It only means something when you're out on the course, right? And when you're actually performing. And that's, similar for comics. It only means something when you're on stage, that microphone's in your hand and people are responding.
Totally. Jay Leno, and he said many times, no comedian ever got better by sitting home.
Right.
You don't get this by osmosis. You get it by standing in a bright light in your face and with people just staring at you like, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, try and make me laugh. So it's pretty wild.
How
Richard Belzer. Do you remember him at all?
Of course, yeah, absolutely. I remember him as a comic before he was Munch on Law and Order. Sure.
Right. He once went on, and Bob Costas had a talk show, Late Night with Bob Costas. And Bob Costas asked him who he thought was one of the worst comedians he had ever seen in his life. And Belzer said, I don't want to answer that. Bob said, come on. And he said, Mark Schiff was one of the worst comedians I had ever seen in my life, but he's gotten so good over the years. He really, and I'm glad he had the second half of that story. He's on NBC and he's just telling the national audience, this guy was absolutely horrible.
When do you consider your first big break in comedy to be?
So there's no one thing, of course. But when I started, there were no comedy clubs. Seinfeld, Reiser, when we started, there was no such thing. There was the Catskill Mountains. There were theaters across the country, and there was Vegas and some nightclub. But no comedy clubs. They weren't invented. So when the comedy club first came around, my group immediately became headliners at comedy clubs. We weren't a middle act or an opening act. We went right to headliner. So that was really the first break, where you're getting paid a couple of $1,000 and you're headlining a club and you're doing television. So that was it. And then from there, you just keep going. And it's one little break after, unless, of course, an agent sees you and they give you a TV show.
When did you do your first Tonight Show with Johnny?
So I talk about it in the book, my book, Why Not? I'll tell you so Jim McCauley came in. He was the talent coordinator. Show Carson was in Los Angeles. He came to New York to see some comedians if we were right for the show. And he saw me one night do my 5 minutes. I got a standing ovation. And he walked out of the bar without talking to me. And I followed him out. And I had an anger problem. And I followed him out in the street. And I said, "Hey, Jim, what do you think?" He goes, "Yeah, it was really funny, Mark. Really good." I said, "So what do you think?" I got a standing ovation. He goes, "Yeah, it was really good, but you're not right for Johnny." He was buying for Johnny Carson. He goes, "You're not right." And I said, "Come on, you see how funny." And he says, "Maybe down in the future, but this isn't right for Johnny." And he turned and walked away. And I said, "Jim," and he turned around and I yelled, "F you" to him. Just screamed it. And he said, "What?" I said it again. And he looked at me and said, "You will never, ever do the Tonight Show as long as you live." 7 years later, I'm in San Francisco at a club called The Punchline. And he comes in. I said, "Jim, how you doing?" He goes, "Good." I said, "What are you doing here?" He goes, "I'm here to see the guy opening for you." I said, "All right." He says, "I got nothing to do tonight. You mind if I stick around and watch you?" I said, "Yeah." I got off the stage. He said, "You got the show if you want it." And he was absolutely 100% right when he didn't book me the first time. I was not ready. He saw it. He knew it. I had an anger thing, and he never brought it up that I told him to F off. And we kind of became friends, and he kept bringing me back on the Tonight Show, and finally I did the panel with Johnny and with Jay.
'Cause I've heard that that's a life-changing experience for comics, getting to not only perform on the Tonight Show, but doing panel with Johnny.
Yeah, that's if you do the show and he doesn't eventually call you over or have you back, you've been sent to Siberia. That's the equivalent of Siberia. You will never be heard of again, probably, because there was no cable and there was no streaming back then. There was ABC, NBC, CBS. That was it. And if you didn't get on one of those shows, or the Tonight Show, the other shows you could do Merv Griffin and Mike Douglas and Dick Cavett, but it didn't have the cachet that Johnny had.
Who was the comic that was opening for you that night?
I can't remember. Once he told me that I had the show, my mind went to you ever see cartoons when the head explodes?
Yeah.
What happened? There was a big puff of smoke came out of my head, like there was a new pope. And that was the deal. So I really don't remember, but he was very good. I do remember the guy getting laughs. But it's funny about the Tonight Show. Comedians that are overweight, if they're really funny, they score faster than almost anybody else in stand-up comedy. America loves overweight people, funny overweight people. Roseanne and John Panette and John Candy and Louis Anderson, all these people, they just scored right away. They were very talented to begin with, but they quite an interesting thing.
Is this a lesson in things working out, when they're supposed to work out? Is it like a universe telling you something that, this was the right time for you to hit Johnny, or,
Yeah, I believe it became my time. I worked very hard for years, on the road, and I was ready. I was ready. I put in the time. People do blow their opportunities. There's no doubt. And that particular night, I did not. And then doing the Tonight Show is arguably the most nerve-wracking thing you can imagine doing with Johnny. You're standing behind the curtain, and you hear Doc Severinsen in the audience, and the band, and you hear Johnny's voice. You go, "Oh my God, what did I get myself into?" This is if this doesn't work, I'm dead. And but it did.
it worked. And then where did your career go from there?
Well, I just worked nonstop for years and years, and then Jerry Seinfeld, who I started with, when I met Jerry at the club, the comic strip, he was working at a place called Burger Brew and Brew. He was a waiter. And he was also selling, I think, jewelry on the street, makes like some extra money. And a little like Honda 250 or something instead of, Porsches. And after his show, he started going back on the road because Jerry loves stand-up more than anything in the world. And I've been on the road with him now for 25 years.
Wow.
Last week, we were just in Birmingham, Alabama, and Peoria, Illinois. And you know this expression, if it plays in Peoria, it'll play anywhere. And this week, we go to Winnipeg and Saskatoon, Canada.
That's fantastic. It's amazing. Amazing. Well, I want to learn a little bit more about your book, Why Not? Lessons on Comedy, Courage, and Chutzpah. What can you share with us about the book, Mark?
Well, first of all, you have to learn how to say chutzpah. It's not what-
Yeah, see, I could do it, but I didn't want to mismisappropriate.
You give away the non-Jew. I can see it. It's written all over your face. The guy is here. So it's like you're getting some phlegm up. Chutzpah. Come on, give it to me.
Chutzpah.
There you go. You're in the tribe now. We'll circumcise. We're going to circumcise you after this, and you're in.
Well, a little too late. I have been circumcised, and please, I do not want any more taken off. But I will admit to having matzo ball soup for dinner tonight.
All right. Yeah. Why not? Lessons on comedy, courage, and chutzpah. Can I show it to them?
Please do. Yeah.
And by the way, I just want you to have another book. It's called I Killed, True Stories of the Road. And there's 200 road stories in here by comedians and Chris Rock, Jay Leno, Mike Myers, Paul Reiser, Larry the Cable Guy, Foxworthy. They're all in here. 200 I killed, which is what we say when we get off stage if you did well. How'd it go tonight? I killed them. I murdered them. I slaughtered them. I demolished them. It's very explosive thing we do,
Well, what's the genesis of the book?
So why not? Lessons on comedy, courage, and chutzpah. How it came about is 2 words can change your life. So years ago, there's a paper called the Jewish Journal, and the guy called me, and he was a fan of my stand-up comedy. He said, Mark, I'd like you to write a story for us. And he told me what? And I said, why not? And he said, okay. And I wrote it, and then he liked it, and people seemed to like it. He said, would you write something else? I said, why not? If I would have said, no thanks, this book wouldn't have been here. And I kept writing over a period of years. Then COVID hit, and I don't like watching TV, and I don't like overeating because I was a chubby guy. I was 50 pounds heavier years ago. And I decided I might have a book here. And I said, why not? And I sat down and I wrote 5-6 hours a day, every day for COVID. And then I had an agent that I knew in New York, Murray Weiss, and I called him up. I said, Murray, I think I wrote a book. Would you like to see it? He goes, why not? I sent it to him and he liked it. And he said, listen, and he mentored me because I knew nothing about putting a book together, And he said, I'll help you put it together if you want. I said, why not? And we put it together. Then a couple months later, he said, ready? We're going to send it out to publishing. We'll see what we got. I said, yeah, why not? He sent it out, 37 rejections in a row. Then we get a bite from Apollo Publishers. He calls me and says, these people would like to take a Zoom meeting with you. What do you want to do? Why not? And they bought the book. And why not is here, and why shouldn't it be? So that's really the story with that book. And the first book, my friend Rich Scheidner called me one day, and he said, it was the same thing. He said, I'm thinking of doing a book of road stories. You want to work on it with me? And I said, why not? And we sat down the next day and put it together. We got them both published, which is a miracle.
It is lightning striking twice, because I know how hard it is just to get one published. I want to talk about why not first, and I would love to dig into road stories as well, because I'm sure there's some fascinating tales in there. But one of the things that struck me about why not is you finding community and how important community is to you, and that's something that really was, resounding to me as I'm going through it. And it seems like, not only do you find a community with your fellow comics and your peers, But you found a community in LA, of people that you're living with, and I just want you to just, if you wouldn't mind, just reflecting on the importance of community in your life.
Sure. So I have a few communities, and without it, I'd go berserk. My comedy community, yes. Every night I had a club to go into when I started, and I saw the same people night after night for years, and it was like being home when I got in there. And then I got involved with I'm Jewish, and I got involved with my Judaism. I took a Torah class years ago, fell in love with a rabbi, Nachum Braverman, and I started going to synagogue all the time. And I've continued now for 37 years. And then I met my wife, and we built our own little community. We got 3 boys, and I've been married 33 years. And I was a loner growing up, only child, walked the streets, mumbling, depressed, unhappy, wasn't welcomed in a lot of groups because I was a very annoying individual. The good kids didn't, just found me annoying. People used to say to me, Mark, you're the most annoying person I've ever met. I would wait for buses. And when the bus stopped, I wouldn't get on. And the guy said, you getting on? And I would just stare at him. And he would go, you're very, very annoying. Then he'd close the door and I'd run and beat him to the next stop. And when he opened the door, I'd be standing there again. So I lived to annoy people. And, but anyway, community for me is everything. I don't like being alone. I never liked living alone. And it's a good thing.
Because you weren't raised religiously, were you?
No, my mother used to say there couldn't be a God if my life was turning out like this. She was really, but I always believed in God. I was born for some reason, I never wavered. When things were really rough and I had a rough upbringing, my mother had like manic stuff and she had bipolar stuff. So I'd sit in my room at like 5, 6, 7 years old and I'd just chat with God. I was an only child. I go, hey, come on, you got to stop this. So I always believed and I still do. So it was never an issue for me. I couldn't imagine not. And a lot of the book is about my community, my journey through my Judaism, and then my comedy friends like Jerry Seinfeld and, people I've met like Katharine Hepburn and Anthony Hopkins and people like that. So I've been very blessed. See, my education doesn't warrant my success, really. A lot of people, I was done with school around 5th grade. I had it with school. I had it with the teachers. I couldn't stand looking at them. They hated me. I hated them. And I used to cut school, but I would go to the library on my own and read and study stuff. And I would cut school when I was like 10 or 11, 12. I'd go downtown to Lincoln Center and watch plays and go to opera, 12, 14 years old. It's crazy. But I always liked the arts and I always related to these great artists.
I think about the life of, successful comedians, involves a lot of time on the road, time away from family. And, for many of them, that can lead to feelings of loneliness, self-destructive behavior, of course. There's, you look at any number of comedians who, life ended really young for them. And, I'm curious, is there a link between your finding faith, you're embracing your Judaism, you're finding a community and maintaining, sanity on the road and maintaining a healthier lifestyle on the road?
Yeah, there is. Absolutely. I had an alcohol problem, which I write about in the book. I'm sober 38 years. Haven't had a drink, nothing, no beer, no wine, no nothing. That was my thing, wine and beer. I was a wino and a beer person. So when I stopped, I actually had the DTs, delirium tremors. I heard voices, sweating. It was insane. So when I got sober, I went back to therapy and then I started taking these Torah classes and the combination has served me well. I believe when I make a commitment that I've made a commitment and I try to stick with it, like with marriage. So many comedians lost their marriage because they cheated on the road. So what I do is whenever I want to cheat, I get naked and I look at myself in the mirror and I realize how lucky I am to be with anybody. So I just stare at myself and go, "You're not going anywhere. Nobody wants this." That's the end of that. So, you know what I'm saying. Not personally, you don't, but try it. You'll see what I'm saying. Um, yeah. So I don't do those things. I don't drink, and I always talk to other recovering people every day, and I got my rabbis and people I can talk to. So it's pretty solid. Doesn't mean I won't fall. I work it every day, just like my exercise. I lost 50 pounds years ago, uh, but I work it every day, to keep it off.
Was there a period of time when you were getting sober that you were afraid perhaps that you wouldn't be funny anymore?
That is a common thing, and the answer is yes. I didn't know if I had it anymore for it took about a year or so, but I do have it, and I have it exponential because I can focus now. I have more focus now, 38 years later, than I did when I was much younger. The booze and everything clouded me, blacking out. I would go on the road with people for 2 weeks, see them at the nightclub, and I go, "Where do I know you from? You want to hear something?" I was at I saw this woman come over to me in New York. She says, "Hey, Mark, how are you?" So I said, "Good, and you?" And I'm looking at her, and she goes, "You don't remember me, do you?" I said, "I'm sorry, I don't." She goes, "I'm Margaret. I lived with you for a year." So I thought she was crazy. So I called my friend John. There were three of us living, and I said, "Do you remember Margaret?" He goes, "Yeah, she lived with us for a year." I have no memory of ever meeting or seeing this woman. That's how bad it was.
Wow. That's
Yeah,
but that's a great tale of coming out of it and coming through it and being
I was.
healthy.
I just felt I couldn't take another drink. I was finished. So, and it was good to know. And something I don't advise it for everybody, but for me, it's worked. It's made me I think, a better person.
Very good. Well, let's talk about some of those road stories. Now, were you part of putting this anthology together, or what was your
Yeah,
role in this book?
yeah. So what we did, Rich Scheidner, the other comedian, and see what happened was he was writing on why am I forgetting with Jeff Foxworthy's TV show?
Oh yeah, the Jeff Foxworthy show, was that what it was
No,
called?
this was like the Southern Boys. Um, can't remember. But anyway, my friend Rich was writing. It'll come to me like I'll call you tonight about 3 in the morning. He was writing on the show. I was down there one time, and during lunch, we all sat around telling road stories. Me, or Rich, me, Jeff Foxworthy, Bill Engvall, a couple of guys. Ron White, I think, might have been there, and everybody from different offices started coming in, and they would listen to these stories, and they were laughing. And Rich called me the next day and said, "We got to write a book of road stories." And I said, "I'm in." And I make very quick decisions sometimes. And
You could have said, "Why not?"
that's right. And we started contacting every comedian in the world that we knew. And most of them did not write the stories. We taped them, and then we wrote them out for them, edited them, and then sent it back for their approval. And it was took about 3 years, 3, 4 years. People don't realize how long it takes to write these things. The thing that sold the story was Chris Rock. Well, Seinfeld did the forward, which helped, of course, and Chris Rock did a menage a trois story. And before he was married, of course, and it was him and two other women, and somebody had sent these women up. He thought it was free, and then they ended up being hookers and wanted $1,000, and he had no money, and he had to go around the hotel trying to collect $1,000 or not be killed by these hookers. So when the publisher, Random House, said, "If you can get Chris," because you needed them to sign off on these stories. He said, "If you can get Chris to sign off on the story, we'll publish the book." And we got Jay Leno and Tom Arnold and Drew Carey, you name it. They were all here.
I think that's a fascinating premise, for a book. I would love to listen to that as a podcast, just listening to people tell their road stories. I think that would just be fascinating.
Yeah. And it is. And who tells them better than comedians?
Right.
We know how to tell these stories. So we tried to sell it as a TV show a few times, and we got close, but it didn't happen. But that's okay. The book is out, and young comedians consider it like a comedy Bible almost. It really lets you know what the road is about, this book. So, and then I wrote 2 plays before Why Not? Play called The Comic. You want to hear a story about writing?
Oh.
Did you ever write a play?
Never written a play, no.
So it's an amazing thing. So I wrote this play called The Comic, and it starred Larry Miller. And Larry's been in like 50 movies, just a sensational actor. And a guy named Henry Labate. It's a 2-character play. And Larry comes over to me one day and goes, hey, Mark, I was on Broadway in Neil Simon play. You want me to call him and see if he wants to come down and see this play? I said, this is my first play. You got my first play. I said, are you serious? Neil Simon? You can get Neil Simon, the greatest playwright that ever lived. I mean, it was Shakespeare and Neil Simon, the two, He said, yeah, I'll call him up. Comes in the next day. I spoke to Neil. He was coming down Friday. He comes down. It's a full house. And I'm watching, and he's laughing and whatever. And at the end of the play, the play gets a standing ovation. And Neil comes over to me and goes, Mark, congratulations on this play. It's your first play. He goes, you cannot make this any funnier. Unbelievable. Then he says to me, but listen, does he live or die at the end? The main character, Larry. I said, I don't know. I'll leave it up to the audience. He goes, no, you can't leave it up to the audience. You have to let them know. You can't let them leave and decide for themselves. You must make a decision. And I decided that the lead character dies. Every night, this play got a standing ovation for the rest of the run. So I say I wrote the play with Neil Simon. And, it was amazing. I mean, It was a godsend. And I've been very blessed. If you got some young listeners here, don't be afraid to go over to people and talk to them. Like I spoke to Anthony Hopkins one day and he befriended me. I spoke to Katharine Hepburn. I worked at a Broadway theater selling candy. Katharine Hepburn became a friend of mine. If you're a trustworthy sort of soul, they'll spot it in you. And they may even give you some information that'll be helpful for your life.
I mean, I love your story, just like from the age of 12, putting a stake in the ground saying, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And then doing it, partly by overcharging, one of your roommates' rent, but that's okay. They didn't seem to mind.
He put me through college. He was, I'm not making, I don't, believe me, I have no guilt about it. His father had some dough. His father paid the rent anyway. So, you want to hear something? This guy's father was Attorney General of Rhode Island. And every Sunday, he would do a 10-minute TV spot teaching people how to do something important. And this one Sunday, he taught people how to make your house safe so it doesn't get robbed. And while he's on TV, his house was robbed. Cleaned him out. Just completely wiped the guy out. So then he had to go back like the next week and go, well, maybe, I didn't know what I was talking about.
Well, then the next one is what to do when your house is robbed.
Yeah. So, I knew at 12. At 18, I went back and started doing it. I had suffered tremendous stage fright. So I quit for 5 years. And at 23 is when I got back up on stage.
How'd you overcome the stage fright?
I have it. I still have it. It's better than it used to be. I mean, I almost passed out years ago. I almost fell off the stage a couple of times. I couldn't even breathe. So like gasping. I was at Caesar's Palace with Diana Ross and I almost collapsed. I would go, imagine this, I'm behind the curtain and there's a guy that bleeds the curtain, he and opens the curtain for you. And I'm standing there, Diana Ross, opening for Diana Ross. And I said to him every night, it was a 2-week run. I said, this is the last show tonight that I'm ever doing as long as I live. If I just get through this tonight, that's it. I'm quitting the business. And then I would rub his bald head. And then the next night I would show up. I go, I know what I said last night. Tonight, this is it. I can't take another night of this. I'm telling you. And that's how I got through 2 weeks. I quit right after this show.
How long between that curtain going up and you getting a laugh does that feeling, that anxious feeling of stage fright begin to dissipate, if it does at all? Because I imagine it must dissipate or, it's not going to be a great show.
So that's a really good question. Um, Sometimes it does dissipate, and sometimes it doesn't. And you just gotta suffer your way through it, with your heart pounding. It's a terrible thing to have, but I own it, and I'm not giving up. The only way through something is through it. You can't go around it. You can't come up from underneath. You can't come, that's it. You got to go through it. I'm going to own it the rest of my life, probably. It's
Well,
some nonsense in me, some deep insecurity. I don't know. 17 years of therapy, they couldn't get out of me. Believe me, they ain't leaving tonight.
well, they want to leave a little bit of it in there because they want you to keep coming back. But the way I think about stage fright, and I've been in the same job for 27 years. I run focus groups. Like we were joking about focus groups before. I run them all over the country. I still get nervous every time I walk into a room full of strangers and have to lead a discussion. But there's something about that nervousness that shows that you care somewhat.
Yeah.
I do think that it does show that this is something that matters to you and you want to do a good job. And then, a few minutes in, I start to calm down and we start to have fun and all that. But I do know just performing as well. Having spoken with so many people who do it, it's okay to feel a little sick to your stomach before you go on.
Some of the greats, would throw up. And I think one of the great actresses of all time would lie down in a coffin before a show. It was crazy what people do. But there is a difference between anxiety and stage fright. There is it's a phobia. And you see, people say, see the audience as your friend. I always saw them as my enemy. That was the problem. I thought they were out to get me, and that they were trying to like rub me out. I had a very negative. So I just, it's better than it used to be. I mean, last week I played 8,000 people. Next week I'm going to play 14,000 people. I played 17,000 people. So, you just go and do it. And I got the goods, I mean, my material is strong enough that it can overcome sometimes some nervousness.
Yeah. Well, what's a big takeaway from your book? Why not? What do you want readers to walk away with knowing, either about you or about even about themselves from reading Why Not?
Yeah, that's another good question. Um, people, uh, people get, you're a writer, people get different things from what you write. Um, there's, there's, there's wisdom in the book, and it's not from me. It's from, I don't know anything on my own. Everything I know, I've learned from other people. And I try to distill wisdom, especially from great people that I've met. And I try to put it in this book somewhat. And because I know how to write jokes, I know how to also fill it in and make it funny at the same time. I think I want people to know that also you can get through almost anything. I can't say everything because I never experienced everything, but I had a really tough upbringing, and there was a lot of threads, and my life was at stake, I felt. And I got through it, and I made a life for myself. That was one of the reasons I also wanted to write certain stories in there, to let people know they weren't alone, because as a child, I felt very much alone. And it's a terrible, terrible feeling, especially for a child. And I wouldn't wish it on anybody. So I've learned how to circumvent it and not. I used to go on the road when I first had a family, and I had my young kids, and I would put pictures of the kids in the hotel rooms. I had to take them down because I missed them so much. So, but it all gets better. The book, I consulted with a rabbi. His name was Joe Seamus, Yossi Seamus. Anything Jewish in the book, I would call him and run it through. This guy's a genius. And to make sure I was on the right track, that I wasn't putting in something, just making up stuff. And it's worked out. So I'm pleased with the book. And, I put my parents are on the cover. And I had a tough thing with my mother. People say, why did you put your parents on the cover if you had such a tough upbringing? I said, because it's over. And all is forgiven. And I know my parents and my mother especially love me. I didn't know it growing up, but I know it now. And I know I loved her, and I wish she was still here so I could hug her.
Yeah. One of the things that I appreciated about the book was your endnotes, the footnotes. There's a lot of comedy in those endnotes and footnotes.
Yes, that was my agent's idea, Murray Weiss. I had footnotes. I had a lot of Yiddish words, so I put the definitions. He goes, "You're a comedian. Write jokes." So I wrote jokes for almost every single Yiddish word. And people really who read the footnotes, they go, "Boy, that was funny." Those footnotes are just like on every page. It's just really, uh, yeah, I was proud of that.
Yeah, no, and I know a lot of people might have a tendency, and I certainly did when I was growing up, and I see footnotes. Those are things you think you can skip. I would encourage people to read the footnotes because they are. Yeah, I got a lot of chuckles out of those. Absolutely.
So
Um,
I'm happy with it, and great to have a publisher behind me. I know a lot of people are trying to do that. It's you know something you just got to do it. Got to
well,
get it.
you were mentioning before about persistence, in terms of being a comic and just getting up there and doing it every night, 6 times a night. Writing is similar. Publishing is similar. You need persistence. You need perseverance. And if you don't have that and a good thick skin, you're going to be very disappointed if you're trying to get something published.
The other night I was with Seinfeld in Illinois, Peoria, and he said, and this happens a lot. He goes, I've been working on this thing for 1 year. I need this one word. He's like a scientist. He distills it down to. So we're talking, and I said, "What about this?" And he goes, "That's it." He'd been working on it for a year. One of the great things about stand-up, as opposed to writing just novels or this or movies, 5 minutes later, he went in front of 2,100 people and put that end to the bit, and it worked.
Yeah.
And then the next night, he did it even better. But he will spend a year looking for a word. That's dedication.
That is dedication. That is dedication. But that's also why, I will say dabbled in stand up. Starting in 2019, so much older. I was probably mid to late 40s at the time. Because I was tired of writing something and not getting any feedback on it for a year plus, reviews, people talking about it. So I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to go to an open mic and try it. And I did. And certainly there is a rush there when things go well, and it's a long 5 minutes when things don't. But it does teach you something, in the moment, whether something's funny or not. Absolutely.
5 minutes could seem like 5 hours to
Yes.
the person telling it and the people sitting there. You know, this is another thing that I talked about with Jerry just recently too. When I go on stage, because I'm not famous, anything near him at all, I get about a 30-second, 45-second leeway. I can, hello, how are you? And they'll wait 30, 40 seconds. He gets 2 minutes. But if he ain't got the goods after that, they're coming after him too.
Right.
There's no open, it's open season on somebody that thinks they are funny.
Absolutely. Mark, one of the things I like to do to get to know my guests a little bit more is just talk about pop culture. And but with a little bit of a twist, I'm curious. When you were growing up, it sounds like you grew up in Forest Hills. Is that right?
Well, I was born in the Bronx, then Forest Hills, Queens.
So growing up, Bronx, Forest Hills. Assuming you watched things on TV or went to the movies, what are some of the things that you enjoyed watching back in those days?
Right. Well, certainly Ed Sullivan. Couldn't get enough Ed Sullivan whenever he was. There were no, we didn't have the luxury of watching it the next day.
Right.
You had to wait for the summer for a rerun thing. Bonanza, I used to love. My Three Sons, I loved. I liked family shows. I liked family shows a lot, but there were Donna Reed. I loved that show. I loved Car 54. That was a really fun. I love the funny shows. Dick Van Dyke put me through the roof. It's so funny.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
TV is so different now, but some of those old shows, there's some comfort, a lot of comfort in some of those old Sure.
Listen, they were ridiculous. There weren't families really like that. That wasn't your average family, but it was sweet and it was wholesome and we believed it. And the whole family could sit down and watch. It's very hard for the family to sit down and watch now something together. My kids won't watch anything in black and white. If they erased everything that existed in black and white, my kids would not be upset about it. But it's hard to get the whole family to sit down. Maybe a movie.
Yeah.
Not for-
Yeah.
So,
What about music growing up?
by the way, and of course, The Tonight Show.
Well, it goes without saying.
Yeah. That I would sit. And when I discovered comedians, Don Rickles, Buddy Hackett, Shecky Green, Alan, King, Phyllis Diller, Toady Fields, Jerry Lewis, mostly Jews, by the way.
Do you
Field-
consider all of them your key influences?
Yeah. Yeah. It was the comedians that in a way legitimized the Jews in America. See, what happened is almost 85% of the stand-up comedians were Jewish in the 1960s and 70s. That's a lot for a very small group of people. 85%. So what would happen is this Jewish comedian would go on Ed Sullivan, and people in the Midwest somewhere that never met a Jew would sit there and laugh their heads off, and they're sitting there thinking, these Jews are funny people. And they endeared these people. They started liking us, and they just thought all Jews were funny. It's an interesting idea. Guy wrote about that. That's where I got that from.
Yeah, no, that is an interesting premise. It reminds me of, I heard about the civil rights, about the civil rights movement. Of course you have your big figures, Dr. Martin Luther King, etc. But then I hear, Jimi Hendrix did so much for the civil rights movement because now you've got this, guy playing rock music, rock guitar, sounding unlike anything anyone's ever heard before. And it changes perceptions of culture.
Oh, absolutely. The other day in Birmingham is where Martin Luther King, Dr. King marched. And Jerry and I walked about 6 blocks of that march the other day. We followed the route. In the afternoon, we went out and we took a walk and we came across that walk. And it was kind of nice. We read the different signs about it. And then we went in Peoria, we went to see Richard Pryor's statue. There's a statue of Richard Pryor. It's on my Facebook and Instagram.
Yeah.
We try to tip our hats and pay respect to the people that made it a better world.
In addition to playing theaters, do you still do clubs every now and then? Any of those clubs in LA?
Sure, that's the greatest growth of all. I do the Tropicana once or twice a year in Vegas. That's 14 shows in 7 nights, and that gets you sharp. You're doing the theaters help, but 14 shows, you walk away a new performer at the end of the week. So yes, I do clubs. I do the Laugh Factory here in LA. I do the Comedy Magic Club at Hermosa Beach. We still all go perform for free. It's not about the money,
Is Leno still there on Sunday nights?
Yes. I worked with him 4 weeks ago. I hosted the show. Leno, Jimmy Brogan, and me. And Leno is as funny as ever. If you go to Comedy Magic Club and see Jay on Sunday night, he's one of the great all-time comedians.
Yeah.
It's an hour and a half, and he just slays them.
Always wanted to go to the Comedy Magic Club. Maybe actually on this trip to LA, maybe I'll extend it and I'll hit Hermosa. I love Hermosa Beach. It's got a lot of personality to it.
Yeah, it's a great place, and it's probably the best comedy club in the country, or one of them. It's a wonderful club. And he has a comedy museum in the club.
Is he really?
Yeah, he has Seinfeld's puffy shirt and Johnny Carson and Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton stuff. So these are comedy lovers that own that club.
Very good. Mark, if people are listening to this and they want to get in touch with you, you have a website or social media that you want to share with everybody?
Yeah, workshift.com. You can find me on there. You can look at my dates. On the dates, there's a lot of photos of me with my famous friends. At Mark Schiff, I guess, on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. And, I'm not that active, but I'm getting more active. When I hit 90, I want to be really active.
That's a great goal.
Yeah, I'm looking for. Can't imagine what's going to be in the future. So yeah, and I'm on the road and come and say hello and buy the book. Why not? I think you're going to like it. It's got all 5-star reviews. It's got some really good reviews by people. So it was a labor of love, and people can feel it. You know, when you do something from your heart, they say it goes from the heart to the heart, and that's what happened here.
Yeah, it is a tremendous read. It's a very touching read. It is funny and it is deep. And you can buy it, of course, wherever books are sold. I will put links to where to buy the book as well as how to connect with you, Mark, in our show notes, so people could just look it up that way and tap away and get in touch with you.
Yeah, the next time you're in a hospital visiting somebody, I might be in the room next door. So take a good look and see if I'm laying. I'll have this shirt on.
Yeah, it is an embarrassing story, but I will own it. Mark, thank you for stopping by and corking a story and letting me uncork yours.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.